This is Toronto Raptors fans split. Zach LaVine has been on the trade market for years now at this point, linked to the Toronto Raptors. And now in the dog days of summer, the Raptors have been thrown into rumors for the Chicago Bulls star Zach LaVine. And this is a move that doesn't make sense for Masai Ujiri to make, but people are making the argument that he fits well around Scottie Barnes. And while this would affect the development of players like RJ Barrett, some people are calling for this to be a nice buy low opportunity for the Toronto Raptors. And frankly, I don't think it makes any sense at all, but we're going to jump into the debate and see whether or not the Toronto Raptors should pursue a Zach LaVine trade, how it would look, the type of deal that would go down, and how it would affect the future of the Toronto Raptors. So we're going to dive into all of that in this video. But before we do, folks, again, if you're a part of the over 50% that haven't hit the subscribe button just yet, make sure you guys hit that sub button so you don't miss a single thing as we inch closer and closer to the start of this Toronto Raptors season, which should be an exciting year for the squad. But let's dive into what's been going on, because the rumors have perked back up for Zach LaVine, who's long been linked to the Toronto Raptors, at least by Toronto Raptors fans and different analysts and things along those lines. And it's basically because the Bulls are continuously trying to shop Zach LaVine. But there's literally no trade market for Zach LaVine right now at this point. The Bulls are trying to give him away and attach a first-round pick. He's been told by Bobby Marks, has been told by multiple people. So the Bulls are looking to give away, their former, I don't even know if I call him a star now at this point, was definitely a big name, had some star-level numbers, which we'll dive into in this video. But they're trying to give him away, and the Raptors have been linked in the past, and now there's analysts coming out and linking the Toronto Raptors to one of these moves once again, as essentially, if we break it down here before we take and dive in the analysis, Colin Keane came out and said the Toronto Raptors stand out as a team that could be interested in adding LaVine. Toronto has Scottie Barnes, Immanuel Quickley, and RJ Barrett on long-term deals, but the Raptors don't have enough pure scoring on their roster. LaVine would provide that and bring balance to the Toronto Raptors depth chart. Now, before we dive into why I don't think this doesn't any sense at all, let's dive into the stats, because LaVine didn't have a horrible year last year when he was actually out there on the basketball court. 20 points per game, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, but definitely a down year. His efficiency was down, 35% from the three-point line, 45% of the field, but even in a down year, wasn't that horrific. I mean, he shoots 45% in the corners, and even though he plays a similar position to RJ Barrett, his shooting could help space the floor for an RJ, for a Scottie, to really get to the rim, get some buckets, and, just be a solid complementary scorer. And then, obviously, in terms of a deal, players that would have to go out, the Raptors have a way to really make a deal happen, and that would be attaching Bruce Brown, who is on a 1-year expiring contract at a very expensive price, but is sort of brought back to facilitate maybe a big team trade, a big move for this Toronto Raptors squad. Average 11, 4, and 3. Zach LaVine is clearly a scoring upgrade over Bruce Brown, even though Bruce Brown's more of a facilitator, more of a defender, and things like that. And frankly, if we're looking at a deal that could make sense in terms of if a trade were to go down, right, the Bulls are willing to attach first-round pick to Zach LaVine. So if they attach one of their 2026 first, so something that's not that far into the future, that far into oblivion, when the Bulls still are probably going to be bad, could be a nice sort of return, and then a couple of second-round picks, and the Raptors just basically attach expiring contracts. Chris Boucher, Bruce Brown, and then to make the money work, Ochai Agbaji, which some people might be frustrated with because, again, he does have potential, but after the Summer League, I think a lot of Toronto Raptors fans are disappointed in this. This is a framework of a deal that if a Zach LaVine trade were to happen, something that could be realistic. But I still think this doesn't make any sense for the Toronto Raptors, despite the fact, and again, I'm bringing all the positives out on Zach LaVine first, right? Because we looked at his stats, 19 points per game last season. For the Bulls just a couple years ago, was in that 27 point per game range, right? This guy, when healthy, when actually out there on the basketball court, because he's played the last couple seasons unhealthy, right, is a dude that can certified get buckets out there in the NBA. Can score with the best of them, can shoot the ball, can slash, can dunk, can do all those types of things. And the defensive end, there's stuff left to be desired, but he's a primary 1A sort of type of scorer out there in the NBA, at least a 1B on a really good winning team, in my opinion. I think Zach LaVine has become underrated out there in the league, and if this was in a vacuum, if contracts weren't a thing, if, the Raptors positioning in terms of the history of their franchise, and sort of retooling, rebuilding space right now, if that wasn't a thing, I think it's actually a smart move to buy low on Zach LaVine. And there's a bunch of teams in the NBA that I think are going to get a nice bargain when this Zach LaVine trade eventually goes down, which I don't think it's going to be the Toronto Raptors. But for the main reasons I don't think the Toronto Raptors make this move, It's the contract. Over the next 3 years, Zach LaVine is making over $40 million, close to $50 million annually over the next 3 seasons. And essentially, that's something that's locked in. That's guaranteed. He's picking up that player option the way his health has been and stuff. So essentially, 3 years of close to $50 million annually for Zach LaVine, that's going to have serious implications on kind of the roster, how things are looking, your flexibility to be able to make moves, to shake things up. And frankly, the Toronto Raptors need to maintain that flexibility. Our current roster is built around Scottie Barnes, who, yes, would benefit from an elite scorer, an elite guy that can knock down the threes, can, looking at his stats once again, right? There's a corner three percentage is 45%. Zach LaVine can knock down the three ball. He can space the floor. He's an elite shooter. So you look at that and say, hey, this is the perfect complementary guy around a Scottie Barnes. But we have other pieces that are more reasonable contracts and are showing more potential. I mean, RJ Barrett, he's been healthy over the course of his career. We saw what he was able to do in the Olympics. We saw what he was able to do in the second half of this season. And yes, he's not the shooter by any stretch of the imagination of a Zach LaVine, but he is a guy that can slash probably better than Zach LaVine now with the injuries he's percolated, because RJ Barrett has the size, has the strength, has that slashing ability. He's not going to be able to dunk like Zach LaVine by anything like that, but he does have that toughness to get to the basket and finish around the rim. He's been improving his jump shot, and is just a guy that fits kind of the two-way mentality of what the Toronto Raptors are doing. And Zach LaVine being another two, coming in, just doesn't make sense to pair alongside RJ Barrett, Immanuel Quickley, and Scottie Barnes, who are more of a 1-2-3. That's going to be a lot has been made about the Toronto Raptors being too small, having to make some moves in regards to the stuff that they're doing out there in the future, right? With this team in terms of changes, because Gradey Dick in the starting lineup with Immanuel Quickley, Scottie Barnes, RJ Barrett, and then your only big man really being Jakob Poeltl. That's going to be a lot left to be desired out there on the defensive, the rebounding side, just being undersized. We've seen what a Toronto Raptors undersized team is going to do in the future, but with Zach LaVine, you're committing to that. You are marrying, you're locking in, you're ball and chaining yourself to that sort of core four group for that Raptors team. Positionally, it doesn't make a ton of sense. He's going to take the ball out of Scottie Barnes' hands, because as much of a elite three-point shooter he is, he has the ball in his hands a lot. He needs the ball in his hands a lot. He's not Klay Thompson by, running to the corners, run around the three-point line. That's the value where he's at. Zach LaVine is doing a lot of isolation scoring, and it's one of those types of players where it's like, oh, can this translate to winning basketball? I don't know. I think on the right team it could, but the Toronto Raptors are not that right team. And then you're tethering yourself to him, and we're seeing the value. And even if you could redeem his value a little bit and maybe trade him for something higher in future seasons, the Bulls are having to give up multiple picks, right? The only way to even entertain this deal for the Toronto Raptors is to look at it where we're getting a first and 2 seconds from the Sacramento Kings. That's the only trade possibility for something like this to go down. So, with that expensive contract, with the lack of kind of versatility, ability to play off a role, he's going to take the ball out of RJ, take the ball out of IQ, take the ball out of Scottie Barnes' hands. He's going to leave a lot left to be desired on the defensive end, and you're committing yourself to a team long-term that doesn't really have that potential to jump back into that winning contention. So while fans are split on it, I get the buy low aspect, given how good Zach LaVine was just a couple seasons ago before his injuries, and you can get him at a bargain because there's no real trade market for him right now, and the Raptors have those expiring contracts to facilitate one of these transactions. I'm still in the camp of this move not making sense. And I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be there, but I think it's, especially in September, interesting discourse, because again, the Raptors do have some big decisions to make regarding their franchise moving forward. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. You guys are the best to make this far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. I'm signing out. Cheers.